Agenda Briefing Forum tonight on the 3rd of June, which apparently is also World Bicycle Day. So happy World Bicycle Day to those who celebrate. I would like to invite Councillor Mel Rosa to read the Acknowledgement of Country.
Thank you. Excuse me. Nan Jerapin Wajak Nunga Bujak Yakin Nija Bilyabado. I'm honoured to be standing on Wajak Nunga country on the banks of the Swan River. Nyan Kadich Nunga Mort Ken Kadek Nija Wajak Nunga Buja. Nan Kadich Nija Nunga Burdia Korea Yeye Borda Balapin Mordich Nunga Kadajan Mort Where Buja Yeye. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and respect past, present and emerging leaders, their continuing cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, which continues to be important today. Nyan Yankan Balapin Nunga Burdie Were More Nija Buja. I thank them for the contribution made to life in the town of Victoria Park and to this region.
Thank you, Councillor Melrosa. We'll start with announcements for the presiding member. 4.1, purpose of the Agenda Briefing Forum. The purpose of this forum is to provide an opportunity for elected members to ask questions and obtain additional information on officer reports in the draft Ordinary Council meeting agenda. It is not a decision-making forum, nor is it open for debate. Members of the public that may be directly affected by an item on the agenda can make presentations, deputations, statements and ask questions prior to the matter being formally considered by Council at the next Ordinary Council meeting. 4.2, notice of recording and live streaming. All participation in the meeting will be audio and visually recorded and live streamed on the town's website. The live stream will be archived and made available on the town's website after the meeting. 4.3, conduct of meeting. All those in attendance are expected to extend due courtesy and respect to the meeting by refraining from making any adverse or defamatory remarks regarding council, the staff or any elected member. No one shall create a disturbance at a meeting by interrupting or interfering with the proceedings through expressing approval or dissent, by conversing or by any other means. All questions and statements made by members of the public are not to personalise any elected member or member of staff. Questions and statements are to be directed to the presiding member, who may choose to call upon an officer of the town or another elected member to assist with responses. 4.4, public participation time. There is an opportunity to ask questions and make statements at the beginning and the end of the meeting. The opportunity to ask questions and make statements at the end of the meeting is limited to those members of the public who did not participate in the first public participation time at this meeting. Public participation time will be held for 30 minutes and any additional time must be by agreement from the meeting and will be in 5-minute increments. 4.5, questions taken on notice. Responses to questions taken on notice that relate to an agenda item will be presented in the officer report for the Ordinary Council meeting agenda under the heading Further Considerations. 4.6, attendance at Council by electronic means. Pursuant to Regulation 14C2B of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, I authorise Councillor Claire Anderson to attend the Agenda Briefing Forum to be held on 3rd of June 2025 by the approved electronic means of MS Teams, as I am satisfied that Councillor Anderson will be in a suitable location from which to attend the meeting, and the equipment she intends to use to attend the meeting is suitable for her to be able to effectively engage in deliberations and communications during the meeting in accordance with Regulation 14C5 of the regulations. Pursuant to Regulation 14CA5 of the regulations, Councillor Anderson has declared that she can maintain confidentiality during the meeting or any closed part of the meeting as the case requires. And thank you for joining us online, Councillor Anderson. In attendance, we have all elected members with the exception of Mayor Karen Vernon, who is an apology. And as already mentioned, Councillor Anderson is joining us online. We also have a number of the town staff headed by Mr. Carl Askew, the Chief Executive Officer. We have no approved leaves of absence. Mr. CEO, do we have any declarations of interest, please?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Item 13.1, Councillor Crozer, an impartiality interest. I have discussed this matter with one of the applicants who asked me about the EOI process. Item 12.1, Councillor Crozer, impartiality. I have discussed this item with members of the community. Item 14.3, Councillor Crozer, impartiality. I have discussed this item with members of the community. And item 12.1, Councillor Devereux, impartiality. I have discussed this with members of the community, their concerns about losing sumps that provide biodiversity to development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Does anyone else have a declaration to make? Councillor Minson.
Thank you. Yes, item 12.1 as well, impartiality. I've also had discussions with members of the community about the item, particularly the petitioner for the sumps and changes to the residential zoning.
Thank you, Councillor Minson. Can you ensure you put that in writing, please? Thank you. Any other elected members have anything that they would like to declare? No, just a reminder that you can jump in at any point during the evening and let us know of your interest if you are aware of one. All right, moving on. Item 7, public participation time. I will open public participation time at 6:35 p.m. Do we have any members of the public who'd like to ask questions or make statements? We do not, so I will close public participation time at 6:36 p.m. Item 8, presentations, we have none. Item 9, deputations, we have none. Item 10, method of dealing with agenda business. I'll now read out the items for which we've received questions in advance. At the end of that list, I would ask you if you have anything to add, please put your hand up and indicate that. And additionally, if you no longer feel the need to ask your questions because you've received a satisfactory answer, please let me know. So at this stage, we have questions on 11.2, Black Swan Theatre Partnership, The Pool, 12.1, Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan, 13.1, 3 Canning Highway, and 14.3, Transitional Residential and Support Worker Parking Permits Report. Does anyone have any additional items that they would like to add? Nope. Is there anyone who'd like to remove their questions from any of those items? Terrific. All right, we will move on to those items and those items only. Okay, so we are starting with 11.2, Black Swan Theatre Partnership, The Pool. I believe, Councillor Devereux, you might have a question?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I do have one, just that I was interested to hear about the proposed pool theatre partnership, which sounds an innovative opportunity. Can you advise if there have been any discussions about making this initiative the start of something more long-standing in terms of a partnership with the theatre company if it goes ahead and is successful?
Thank you, Councillor Devereux. I will address that one to the CEO, if I may.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Not for this production, which will end its run at the town of Vic Park as part of a regional tour. However, we are hopeful that building a relationship with Black Swan Theatre could see more productions brought to the town in the future.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions on the pool item? None? Councillor Anderson, if you wish to ask something, please make a very obvious movement or put your hand up electronically and the governance staff will tell me. Thank you. Next item, 12.1, Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan. We have a number of questions here. Councillor Cruiser, do you have a question you'd like to ask? Councillor Minson, I believe you have some questions.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I've got a series of questions and they're mostly focused on the large concessions being given to developers and the major site landholders through the town's recommended modifications. So specifically about, I guess, what's proposed to be changed. And I guess as I go through the questions, just to I guess, for a bit of context, I might ask kind of might seem to be like a rhetorical question, but it's really just to kind of establish context. So just let me know if you find that not working, but just for other elected members and just for myself as well to make sure we're talking about the same thing because it does get quite complex. Yeah.
It's a light agenda and I'm feeling very generous. Yeah. But yeah, just watch it.
I'll be very, very
Thanks.
So I guess my first question is on the recommendation to remove the standard 5% public open space cash and lieu requirement. And my understanding is that there's a state planning framework that recommends a 10% provision of public open space or cash and lieu. but that's typically for larger greenfield residential sites, and that there's an operational policy that recommends 5% in, I guess, the situation we're in Albany Highway. But there are, I guess, constraints to that you need to have a local planning policy to say this is how you'll spend the contributions you're receiving, because it gets, I guess, a bit more untransparent. But then I guess we're recommending 0% as part of our changes to the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan. So I guess that kind of basis is correct if I go from there? Or?
We'll address that question to Ms Ward. Or Mr Doy, if he'd like to help.
I might jump in there if that's okay. Sorry, off script. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ife. It is correct, but it's also worth saying in response, though, that that the community benefit framework that's being proposed provides the opportunity for developers to provide public open space. So when we say a 0% cash in lieu for public open space, that is correct, but there is a mechanism that's being proposed where public open space can be provided. It's just different.
Okay, just follow up on that one. I guess the differentiation we have to make there is that we'd only receive contribution through the community benefits framework if people were pursuing the bonus criteria. So my understanding would be that if, assuming everybody in the precinct did the base level of development, which is still a significant uplift to the residential density, that we would then receive 0 contributions, because you wouldn't capture anything through the community benefits framework and you'd be capturing 0 through a public open space contribution.
Ms Ward?
Thank you. It's true for the majority of sites. The major sites still have that requirement built in where there is open space required. And I know further in your questions you've talked about removing specific parameters around those open spaces being provided in terms of taking away the size. But the major sites are still required to provide open space. But if everyone was to do the base, then you're right, there wouldn't be open space provided. And I think it's also important to just note that the 5% operational policy is just a draft and it hasn't been endorsed. So at the moment, it's not really a standard practice doing that for built strata. But there are other opportunities for the town to pursue that 5% if we go down the local planning policy pathway. And then it's more of a town-wide, I guess, approach. And that then also responds to some of the feedback we received from the state government in terms of putting the 5% in there.
Councillor Minson?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll get to the removal of the minimum area requirement in a subsequent question. So I guess back to the going to 0% for public open space cash in lieu requirement. Does the town have an estimated total long-term financial impact? So the financial impact to the town from removing this 5% public open space requirement. So what would be the town's lost, I guess, contribution from moving from a 5%, the current draft 5%, to 0%?
Ms Ward? Mr Doy? Ms Ward?
It is very difficult to put a value on that. That's obviously tied to the uptake of development that occurs. So there hasn't been any, I guess, valuation done on the total overall 5%, but it's not something that the town is currently applying to subdivisions anyway. So currently it's just practice as normal.
Councillor Minson?
Thank you. So if we assume that the whole of Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan gets developed, and taking that as the assumption, if you applied the 5% value to all that land area, you would get a square metre rate of, as 5% of this land would have been public open space. And if you assume that it was paid as cash in lieu, you could apply a square metre dollar rate for that value of land. So is that something that the town could do to then show, under the full development scenario, this would have been the 5% POS contribution, and this is the scenario which is 0%, which is zero?
Mr Doy.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ife. We could do that. I would say that an assumption that full build out of the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan area is highly, highly unlikely to ever occur. So I would say, so you absolutely could, but I would say that it would be whatever figure that generated would be not particularly useful, because we just would, I just think it's extremely unlikely that full build out is ever likely to occur.
Councillor Mitson.
So then you could use the figures, I guess, in the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan, like 85% development out at 2060 or 2050. You could use, you know, the numbers that get us to 800 additional dwellings to 2030, something, is it? So you would be able to, I guess, take that high figure and look at the curve and say, well, this is how much public open space contribution we would have got if we got X percentage of development, Y percentage development, and then that would, I guess, give council the ability to say, well, look, this reduction from 5% to 0% is going to cost the town this much.
Councillor Mitson, are you asking if they would be able to do that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, Ms Ward.
So we could obviously put a average cost of land value. It's something that we don't know. There's a lot of variation in land values. POS is also attributed to residential land value, so it wouldn't necessarily comply with state government's valuation process, but it's a number we could come up with. But that number would just be, I guess, an assumption based on what land values are going to be as an average across the precinct.
Yeah. Yeah, all the assumptions listed and justified, yep. So is that something that could be provided?
Ms Ward? Yep. Anything further, Councillor Mitson?
There is a few, sorry. So yeah, wouldn't ask me that every time, because I'll tell you what. So I guess going on from that, I guess I'm just seeking the justification of why we're removing this 5%. I acknowledge that there's, I guess, procedural difficulties, but I guess with that number likely to be very, very large, that really there's no evidence or analysis presented in this report that justifies the removal. So I was wondering if there's, I guess, further comment or if there is analysis done to, I guess, justify that removal.
Ms Ward?
Thank you. So I have obviously looked at, based on the submissions received, the cumulative impacts of all the different contributions that are being applied, and then obviously taking into account the community benefits contribution values, the 1% art contribution value, and then also the public open space contribution value. And then I have looked at different scenarios across the precinct to see how the 5% does play out in terms of additional impact on feasibility to development. But after doing that analysis, and I can provide more information on some of those scenarios, the decision was really made around the advice that was received from the Department of Planning and their recommendation for using the local planning strategy and the public open space strategy to develop a town-wide public 5% contribution that doesn't just look at the precinct on its own, but looks at the accessibility to public open space within proximity to the precinct as well. So it's taking a bit more of a town-wide approach. And so then I've made the recommendation to remove it from the structure plan.
I do apologise, Councillor Minson. I was told you had 6 questions and I was already
Well,
up to
no,
7. Then I
there's-
realised it's like a high school exam. He has 6 questions, each of which have about 5 or 6
6 A's and
parts.
6 B's.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So carry on, Councillor Minson.
Thank you. So I guess the response being that you looked at the cumulative impacts of the 3, public open space, community benefits, the art, together. So that's correct. That it's really all those 3 taken together causes a viability issue, I guess, is the position, and that changes were made to all 3 to bring it back within, I guess, a position that you've stated is, I guess, like a development viability. You're saying that with these 3 contributions together, that future developments wouldn't be viable.
Mr Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I think that those 3 contributions and anything that we're asking developers to contribute can affect viability, especially in the context of the market at the moment. So we have had, I think it's been cost escalations in construction at like 40%. It's a really difficult environment. We've had traditionally extremely slow growth in the town of Victoria Parks, certainly since I've been here over the last 6 to 7 years. So it's cognizant of that overall context. Different sites will enable different levels of, and different developers will have the ability to contribute in different ways. So someone who's building a 2-storey restaurant on Albany Highway on a small block is very different to someone on a major land holding who's doing something really, really significant. But I hope that answers the question in terms of what we're thinking about, the context we're thinking about in terms of contributions. Yeah.
So I guess I'm chasing a bit of data to sit behind that type of opinion, because in the draft Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan, there was viability assessments done, and they both showed, I guess, that the base scenarios are all viable, with the 5% POS contribution and the 1% art contribution, which makes sense because that's quite standard. And then the community benefits framework was analysed within itself, because I guess it talks about a bonus gift from, in terms of a developer limit increase, like height limit increase or a plot ratio increase, and compares, I guess, with that benefit, so the extra profitability generated from an increase in building height with the bonus, is that bigger than the cost of the community benefit strategy at 3%? And the Hatch Roberts Day report said, yes, every time you look at it in each scenario we looked at, it's always viable to pursue the bonus and pay the 3% community benefits framework. And, they're quite long reports, and I assume there's quite a bit of analysis behind them. So I guess with these recommendations now saying, actually, we've got a new opinion on that, I guess I don't see the data or the analysis done in the report. So I was wondering, is that available? Has it been done? And how does that actually compare? Yeah.
Ms Ward?
Thank you. Yes, I have got data that I can share with you based on the current market and what's happening. Obviously, the 3% feasibility done by Hatch was one analysis, and I think after we've received feedback from stakeholders as well as feedback from state government that has said that the 3% isn't necessarily like a standard that should be applied, and that it should be more of a case by case in terms of location. Every location is going to be different in terms of what becomes feasible and viable. But I do have scenario testing that sits behind that I can share with you.
That would be great to be provided. Yep. Thank you. And I guess a comparison with the draft documentation. Yep. Is that possible? Yep.
I know you have further questions, Councillor.
Thank you.
Minson.
Yep. And I guess so. I want to be clear, I guess, on how much, I guess, the responses from in the response schedule, I guess particularly the ones there that we responded to removing this 5% public open space requirement, were from the landholders of these major sites. So, and as you expect, the developer says, don't want to pay that, and our response was, we're going to remove it. So I guess I just want to get a feel, like, how much was that the decision, and how much was a reanalysis and viability of the decision?
Mr. Doy?
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor. I wouldn't want to have the perception spread that a developer was in touch with the town and suggested that they didn't want to provide public open space, and therefore we've removed a 5% cash in lieu for public open space that can't be provided requirement in the precinct structure plan. So just let me be clear in saying that. What I would reiterate is that one of the primary reasons for the removal is because of advice from the Department of Planning and the requirement from their perspective to have a local planning policy that deals with cash in lieu being provided for public open space that's not provided within development across the entire town. So rather than having that provision just for a small part of the town in a precinct, their view is that you should have a local planning policy that deals with it across the town. So that was the primary driver for the removal of it.
So that advice by DPOH, was that provided as a response to this precinct structure planning? Can that advice be provided to elected members?
Ms. Ward?
So part of the process going through the advertising of the precinct structure plan, we have met with the Department of Planning and talked them through some of the submissions that we've received and our proposed responses to that. Initially, we had thought that we would leave the 5% in, but it was pretty strong advice from the Department of Planning that it would not likely be supported unless we had that backing behind it of the broader policy.
So I guess your question was, that advice can be provided? Oh.
Well, this was a meeting in person
Okay.
with the Department of Planning, with their officers, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I guess with the position that you need a local planning policy to keep this 5% requirement in, is the town able to do that local planning policy and presumably before we ratify this Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan, so from the get-go we can keep the 5% contribution within the precinct structure plan, have a local planning policy in place? Does it have to happen, I guess, before we approve this recommendation, or can it kind of happen concurrently with leaving this 5% requirement in?
Mr. Doy?
It can, well, it wouldn't be, if council were going to make a decision on the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan as part of this council round in June, it certainly couldn't happen. There would be the construction of a local planning, town-wide local planning policy, and then I suspect the need for some level of information around where the money that we would be collecting from cash and lieu would go, like an implementation plan. That's a lot. That would be a long. I'd be hesitant to put a time frame on that, but that is a fairly long process. And I would say that from my opinion as a practitioner, it would be a low risk to be able to continue on with the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan as this part of this council round, and then identify the construction of that local planning policy as a future piece of work that could then help to inform cash and lieu collection from development in the Albany Highway Precinct and more broadly in the town. And we can always, if we need to, I'm not sure whether we would require it, but if we needed to, we could always go back and amend the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan. It's an amendable document. It doesn't just, once it's created, it doesn't just sit there forever. We can go back and change it if needed, and go through a process and change it, that amendment could happen concurrently with the construction of a cash in lieu for public open space local planning policy.
And just to be clear, is that what the town is recommending we do? Because you're kind of saying that we should keep the 5% contribution into the long term. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ife. Yeah, I think we're open to that, and sorry, I know that we are open to that, and it is a recommendation in our public open space strategy to explore, investigate the development of a local planning policy across the town to help guide how we collect and use public open space cash in lieu payments. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess in lieu of removing this 5% requirement, going to 0%, how is the town planning to fund, I guess, mostly the public realm strategy? Because it seems like we actually have listed all the infrastructure that we want in Albany Highway and all the improvements to public open spaces, which I presume is most of the local planning policy work required to justify collecting a 5% is to say what you're going to spend it on. So the public realm strategy has all that in it. So how are we going to fund that without a 5% contribution?
Mr. Doy.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ife. Through a combination of through the community benefit framework, so there's the ability to fund a lot as it relates to this specific development through the community benefits framework, through external funding opportunities. So there are funding opportunities that exist now for some of the things that are identified in the public realm strategy, and then I suspect that those external funding opportunities will continue to grow because state government knows it's hard to deliver as a local government. It's hard to deliver all of these things, and through our own funds as well as a local government.
Okay. So I guess moving on to the other recommendation to remove the requirement on the major sites M2, M4, M6, M7, which has a minimum at the moment in the draft, I should say, has a minimum requirement for a square meterage rate of public open space on these major sites, typically 1,500 square metres or 2,000 square metres. And my reading, I guess, of the response schedule was that we didn't want to be constrained to one big public open space in the middle of the lot, so that we'd want to activate different areas of the site, and therefore can you amend that? And my reading of it was that you would amend, I guess, just remove the word single 1,500 square metre public open space. So I guess what's the justification, I guess, to get rid of the minimum square metre requirement completely? So effectively, from my reading of it, if the town is convinced that 10 square metres over the whole site is justifiable down in 20 years' time, that could be approved. But if we said 1,500 square metres distributed, would that not achieve what I guess you're after? Or do you have a comment on that?
Ms. Ward.
So the recommendation to remove the size metrics was really about allowing some flexibility in site design following, I guess, when development does occur, the quality of the open space being provided for. It may not require such a large piece of open space. It might be a smaller piece of open space that's developed to a much higher standard than what would be required. So it was more about just referring to, I guess, the locations that are being shown on the precinct plan as opposed to tying them into a specific size requirement that has to be met, just to get that flexibility that you might get more quality open space over just large areas of open space.
Okay. I guess, I see the value in a minimum requirement. So I guess what you say, if we left a minimum requirement, whatever the town recommend is what we'd like to see as a minimum, that we could remove the word single and achieve, I guess, what you're after in terms of activating different areas of the site.
Ms. Ward.
You could, if I think, removing or stating a size requirement has generally been tied to, I guess, the public realm strategy, and it was my thinking that it would just be more flexible to allow development to deliver various types of open space. If you wanted to maintain the size, then I guess that would be your decision to do so.
I guess I'll follow up on that. You talk about the public realm strategy, but I guess it's talking about the shortfall over the whole precinct of public open space, like that's acknowledged to be a severe kind of shortfall over Albany Highway, and that I guess acknowledging that large parks do kind of provide a certain kind of utility that you can't really get from little pocket parks everywhere. So is the town, because my reading of the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan was that those parks proposed at the major sites did alleviate the risk that we were trying to manage, or the issue we were trying to manage with the low public open space. So are we now saying that, I assume, is it a neighbourhood size park or whatever that classification is, that we don't need those 4 neighbourhood size parks anymore? Because we removed every requirement for a large park with those modifications.
Ms Ward?
I'll have to take that on notice because I don't believe that the recommendation is recommending that they don't provide public open space or large parks.
We'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess, do we have an estimate, I guess, of, obviously it's a concession made to response of developers saying they want more flexibility. Do we have an estimate of that, removing that requirement for large parks at these major sites along Albany Highway, what the financial benefit to the landholder or the developer is?
Mr Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. The answer is no. Yep.
And I guess following from that, because presumably removing the requirement, again, is about a viability of the development type of situation, that, you know, it's not unviable to have a large park in the middle of this major site, or so the argument goes. So have we done an analysis to kind of show that leaving these requirements in would make those projects unviable?
Mr Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. No, we haven't done an analysis, unless Ms Ward wants to tell me something different, for every single major site and the various different types of configurations which could occur on the site, the heights, the bonus plot ratio, the bonus heights. There are so many different ways to design each of those major sites. It would be difficult, I would say, to do an analysis. Whereas what we would expect is that we would have a framework that the development community can respond to and do their own analysis, but have hopefully a strong framework which gives them a clear indication of what they're required to provide.
Yep. But yeah. All right. Moving on to the community benefits contribution rates, reducing those. I guess, does the town have estimated, again, long-term financial impact or total financial impact to the town from reducing this contribution rate? And similarly to the public open space, you know, with assumptions provided, I guess how much the town is losing in potential contributions by making those reductions proposed?
Ms Ward?
So the community benefit framework is an opt-in mechanism, so there's no guarantee that it will deliver any, I guess, monetary to the town. And I guess we can't really assume what that uptake is going to be or what it would be. So we haven't sort of done any I guess, long-term valuation impact of community benefit, reducing or providing a tiered approach as opposed to a flat rate.
So I guess I'm not looking for what we think the actual will be. It's more like a scenario type of thing. So you can make assumptions and say, well, maybe 20%, 30%, 40% pursue the bonus heights or the bonus plot ratios and therefore, if you had the old 3% or the draft 3% rate, or if you had the proposed 1.5% rate, this is the difference, and this is the financial impact to the town from making that proposed change.
Ms Ward?
So I do have a scenario which applies the 3%, and then also then that looks at tiered approach for a bunch of different scenarios across the site. So if you wanted a specific example, say we were looking at the Hawaiian site, which would go, a development could be around $200 million on that site. So under the 3% rate, you'd be looking at a $7.2 million contribution. Under the tiered approach, it would be a $5.4 million contribution value. So basically it would reduce from a 4% overall impact on them down to a 2.7. And that's obviously one of the larger site opportunities, but I've got information that I can provide on different scenarios across the site.
That'd be great if you could send that through. I guess on those numbers, so I do have a question on the calculation, and that for my looking at it, it does seem like there is an error. I think we've based this on the South Perth kind of community benefits framework. My understanding is they got a similar 3% number in their town planning scheme, and the way there's disconnect with the way that R1 is worded at the front end of the community benefits framework, where it talks about applying the 3% to the prorated construction rate of the bonus over the base. And so it's going to get quite a little bit technical here, but I think these guys will be helpful. But if you have a case where you have a 5-story base, 5-story base limit, and you have a bonus, just for argument's sake, 5 stories above. So you could have a 10-story bonus height kind of development. That my understanding from reading the words is that the 3% applies to the construction cost to build the extra 5 stories. And that would align to the South Perth scenario. But our calculations in our Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan have it as applied to 100% of the cost to build the construction, because our number is 5 divided by, instead of the total height, it's 5 divided by the base height. So it ends up being 5 divided by 5 times the construction cost rather than 5 divided by 10 times the construction cost. Are you following me there? Yeah. Is that correct?
Anyone else feel like they're sitting their kids' Year 9 maths exam right now? Ms Ward?
No, the calculation is based on the additional construction cost above the base height.
So it should have been 50% of the construction cost in my scenario, 50% of the construction cost times 3%. Yeah.
Yep. So it's a percentage of the total construction sum times by the number of stories above the base standard divided by the number of stories. So it does work out to calculate just on the...
So I think...
I'm wondering, sorry, Councillor Mitson, I'm wondering if it would help if that could partly be taken on notice, so there could be some written explanation of that formula for us. That would be great, thank you. Councillor Mitson.
Because unfortunately I think our equation, and the one I think your numbers referred to, because is not doing that, because in the scenario for Hawaiian, we end up with a kind of... the number actually ends up being greater than 3%, you said 4%. So which can only happen if we've actually escalated the construction cost above.
Right. Councillor Minson, you are getting very close to debating and trying to get into the nitty-gritty. If we
Yeah,
could
that
make
was
sure
our
we're
advice.
sticking to questions. Thank you.
Correct. So I guess back to the similar point. So there's reduction in the 3% rate down to a tiered approach. Was there a feasibility analysis done on those rates, more so than just looking at one site, but actually looking and just the actual what just the rate is $9 million, but actually looking at comparing that to what do we think all the apartments would sell for? What are the other costs associated, and add it all up like they did in the draft feasibility report, and actually make a viability assessment from there, rather than just, I guess, looking at the number and thinking, oh, that looks a bit big.
Ms Ward?
So I have looked at that using the Vic Quarter site as an example, and then adding the construction cost index from the time that that was developed on, to see, like, taking into account the sale prices of that particular development, and I can provide that information.
Thank you. So I guess another similar question then, just to get clarity on why we are reducing the 3% contribution rate. Again, is it to do with pursuing viability for these future projects? Is it saying that with these changes, because again, noting that the draft report clearly states that you would always pursue the bonus heights with a 3% rate. It always is more viable. So are we saying that we have a different opinion now, and that is why we're deciding to change the rates?
Ms Ward?
Yeah, after receiving the submissions and looking at the various base rates and bonus rates across the site, and obviously there are lots of variation and disproportionate bonus opportunities across the precinct, some with obviously quite more exponential opportunities. And so I was looking at a more fair and equitable way so that the small developers would be more incentivised to take up the bonuses and provide community benefit, whereas that's where the tiered approach came in, because that would reduce it more so for the smaller developers, then going when development increases more exponentially, then the 3% still applies.
Yes, I guess I'm getting struggling because we have the analysis done, written, reported, all the data for the original, and we are just kind of stating opinion on the new one without a written report or data behind, I guess, a review of the viability. So I guess I'm really asking, is there evidence and data to support this new proposed position, other than a direct response to the schedule of submissions?
Ms Ward?
So it was done in-house, not through our consultants. So it was more of an officer response and analysis, and the recommendation based on that.
Thank you. The next point is, I guess, the expansion of the list of possible community benefits, with more items, and then a stated preference that the developer provide those community benefits in kind. So effectively, they do it themselves instead of providing, again, cash in lieu to the town to provide. And noting that in the precinct structure plan, it was an identified kind of risk that going down that path, that there was a community perception that the developers would satisfy the community benefit contribution requirement through on-site delivery of, I guess, goods and services for people on the site. And, for example, I guess one of the benefits is end-of-trip facilities, for users of that apartment rather than a public end-of-trip facility. So I guess, how are we going to address the risk and manage the perception that these developers are fulfilling their community benefit requirement, but really just delivering a better product for the people that are going to live in that apartment complex? Because with the expansion of this list and the recommendation to expand the list, there's a lot of options, I guess, to fulfil their requirement. So do we have a plan to manage the risk that's identified in the plan?
Ms Ward? Mr Doy?
I'll give Ms Ward a break for a sec. My answer is the one that was provided, which is all in-kind contributions must demonstrably deliver a public or community-facing benefit, not just internal or private value enhancements for site residents or occupants. The town retains discretion to assess and approve whether proposed benefits meaningfully serve the broader precinct and community based on the benefit categories, location and design. The expanded list of eligible benefits is intended to provide flexibility and innovation, not to dilute the community value or allow purely internal site enhancements to replace public contributions. Now, in terms of how that's administered, as an application comes through, well, that is the job of our urban planning team as trained professionals to be able to assess an application, assess a design, assess the justification for those benefits, and be able to talk about that internally with the other professionals at the town, then make a judgment.
Thank you. Only a few more. The Department of Education response about the current situation, that they're stating that every public primary school in the catchment is over capacity. I guess, how much responsibility does the town have in approving all this additional residential dwellings for that stated position that every single primary school in the catchment is over capacity and they don't have a plan to expand them? Is that a responsibility that then, I guess, a requirement for us to take that into account and say, well, really that this is, unjustifiable in terms of from that lens?
Mr Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ife. First and foremost, to say that we build this precinct structure plan on the guidance and requirements of the state planning department, so the Department of Planning. So there's a series of infill targets that we're required to meet and a whole bunch of guidance that we're required to deliver on, but in a locally responsible way. So that's our first job. But then as we construct that local planning framework, it needs to go to the Department of Education for comment and their view. And that's been provided, unless Ms Ward wants to tell me anything differently, that's been provided to the Department of Education along the way, because this very large project has a series of stages. And the Department of Education, it is their job to monitor growth within their schools, have an understanding of the future demographic, what it means for their school, and undertake that future planning. And so if that requires expansion to the school, if the school needs to expand up or do something different, that is the job of the Department of Education. They get furnished with that information from us. That is their job.
So yeah, so we fulfil the state planning, framework, or the Perth Appeal $3.5 million, I guess, strategy, and we just tell the Department of Education, look, this is how we're doing it, and they go away with that onus on them to make sure that everybody's got a school.
Mr Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Member Ife, and I might swing to Ms Ward if I need to, but we certainly don't say this is just how we're doing it. This is what's proposed, and then it's open to them, like it is for other agencies, to provide us with a response on what they think about what is being proposed. So they provide comments, which we then take into account and allow that to inform our planning framework. In terms of what the Department of Education did or didn't say, that would be a Ms Ward question, that one.
So I guess on that, the response was that all the primary schools are over capacity. So then, in our response to that, is there then justification, for example, at that Victoria Park primary school, there is, a lot that I think, the one I mean on the corner of Geddes and Albany Highway, that Albany, the primary school kind of wraps around, and it just seems like such an obvious place to expand the school into when you're doing the redesign of this whole framework. So was that something that was discussed then back with the Department of Education, so we understand your issues? Have you thought about purchasing this land and we can zone it for you as required?
I feel like I can almost answer that question. Would either of you like to address that? Or
No, it wasn't specifically raised with them to pursue that as an opportunity. And I guess they've been presented the precinct plan, so they would know what land holdings are around them to actively pursue.
I can tell you, Councillor Minson, as someone who's been on that primary school board for a very long time, the awareness that it doesn't take up a full rectangular block and that there's a private land holding there has been a complication for that school for a very long time.
And this, I guess, so finalising, this isn't the mechanism to address that issue?
Ms Ward? Mr Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. No, I don't see how that particular matter would certainly change administration's recommendation to proceed with the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan.
But as like a specific zoning for that lot doesn't provide a response from the town about that, not about the total recommendation of the precinct structure plan, but how that lot is zoned as an 8-storey, I guess, residential complex.
Do you have an answer to that, Mr Doy?
From what I understand, we didn't get a comment to that extent from the Department of Education, so therefore we wouldn't be proposing any specific school rezoning to a site where we haven't had that type of comment from the Department of Education.
Okay, so we expect the Department of Education to look at that plan, to look at all the plans and over Perth and say, look, this lot, this is how we
Councillor Minson, I'm really going to have to caution you. You're starting to debate with the staff.
I'm trying to get clear.
Wind it into a simple question.
Yeah, so whose role and responsibility, I guess, is it to rezone land for educational purposes?
That's a question we can answer, Mr Doy.
It's the job of the town to prepare its local planning framework and present it to the Department of Planning for assessment, and it's ultimately the West Australian Planning Commission's job to determine amendments to our scheme.
Okay, thank you. So I guess considering the changes we're proposing here, and that, in my opinion, they're quite significant, particularly the concessions being given to developers. At what point, and is it the town's responsibility, I guess, to make the determination that these changes are significant and acknowledging that we are doing them after the community consultation period, and again, my opinion, that these changes aren't necessarily in response to the schedules. They're the kind of issues that have been long-standing, that we are making these changes after the community consultation period. So is it in the town's responsibility to say, no, that it's appropriate that the community gets to see these changes and, I guess, through a community consultation period?
Mr Doy?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ife. From our perspective, from administration's perspective, we see that the changes as a result of the submissions that have been received and from the documentation that was advertised, the changes aren't so significant that they would warrant a reconsultation process with the community.
And I guess, we're comfortable to have that position that these aren't significant changes when we don't have the estimated cost to the town of these changes.
Mr Doy, you can take it on notice if you prefer.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Yes, we are confident with the changes and ultimately the resolution that we're putting before council.
The issue as to whether council is confident is for council to decide. Anything further, Councillor Minson?
Yes, one final question.
One final question.
So does the town have an estimate, I guess, of the land value uplift being gifted through the proposed rezoning over the precinct structure plan? So I guess in broad terms, I guess obviously it's complicated, but do we know how much value we're generating for the owners of this land by rezoning this land up to what it is?
Mr Doy.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. No, we don't. We don't know whether there'll be changes to the value, and it's important to remember that changes to the value of land or changes that ensue because of changes in development potential aren't a planning consideration.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Minson. Thank you very much, Mr Doy and Ms Ward. That was an absolute marathon. Councillor Devereux, I have you down for having a question.
Just one question.
Does it come in 17 parts, Councillor Devereux?
No, just the one part. Thanks. My question was, given concern in the community about losing sumps in the precinct structure plan, can you advise if any sumps that currently provide open space and biodiversity protection will be lost with this proposal, and if so, how can this be prevented?
Ms Ward.
So in the precinct plan, table 23 identifies all the sumps that had potential for redevelopment, and the enhancement of the majority of sumps in the precinct. The enhancement of sumps for greening and biodiversity is the preference. Obviously, the Merton Street sump is one that we have responded to in the submissions and are recommending that change from development potential to biodiversity greening function. There are two other sumps in the precinct, which are the King George Street car park and the Balmoral car park, where they have underground cells, so they don't really provide any biodiversity function at the moment, and they're actually providing parking in the town, so they're strategic parking sites. So it's not intended that they get changed to having a biodiversity function. And in response, following the review of the Merton Street sump, there is one additional sump that was identified as potential redevelopment in the Macmillan precinct on Albany Highway. And that sump may or may not be needed for greening or biodiversity. As part of the M6 site, it does have it identified as a green link through that space. But yes, obviously sumps provide a drainage function in the town as well. So there wouldn't be any, I guess, recommended change to that drainage function without some much larger, broader strategic drainage modelling that said that they were no longer needed as sumps. But for the most part, because there is greening deficiency in the precinct, they've been identified as having that biodiversity and greening function. Yeah.
Thank you. Does that help, Councillor Devereux?
That helps a lot. I have a part B then. Only B, I promise. I think there's an indication that table 23 in the plan would be modified to show the Merton Street sump and the Macmillan precinct sumps for retention of biodiversity function. When would that change to table 23 happen? Would that happen before the next stage or after the next stage? Thanks.
Ms Ward.
Thank you. So the process going forward is that we obviously present our recommendations, and then the outcome from the council meeting with the recommendations either endorsed or not endorsed go to the state planning DPLH for their consideration. And so they consider the draft Albany Highway as it was advertised, and then they consider all the recommended modifications with that, and then they will come back with a decision on those modifications to support the changes or not.
Thank you.
Many thanks. No further questions, I promise.
Thank you, Councillor Devereux. Councillor Crusoe, did you want to ask your question now? You feel satisfied? Is there anyone else who has a question in as many parts as necessary? Councillor Hamer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just two follow-up questions from Councillor Menson's questions. So the initial Hatch report mentioned that there was always a benefit to the development of the sites, but the tiered approach is now because that benefit wasn't as much to the smaller developments. Is that? But there was always a benefit, but just wasn't spread evenly to the smaller heights.
Ms Ward.
Thank you. So the just the disproportionality between the bonus incentives, with some sites having maybe 2 or 3 height bonus and some having 10, 12 story height bonuses, and then the impact of the 3% on the smaller of them actually uptaking that incentive would be more unlikely. So it's just about trying to make a more fair. So the tiered approach applies a lesser rate across up to 60%, and then the 3% to those developments which are seeking a much more substantial height increase.
Councillor Hamer.
Thank you. And just following up on that, so but that wasn't mentioned in the Hatch report as a concern that that was a disproportionate benefit between those two options.
I think, well, the Hatch report was really saying that any development at the moment is relatively unfeasible. So it is likely that a development that's going to develop is going to take on the incentive bonuses. But then obviously some of the feedback that we received is that cumulative impact of open space contributions, the 1% art and the community benefits, where the Hatch report didn't really take into that cumulative impact of various contributions. So it was looking at it more holistically.
Councillor Hamer.
And just on the last comment from Officer David Doy, that planning considerations don't take land value into consideration. What was the quote?
Mr Doy.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Maybe I wasn't super clear, but the amount that somebody stands to make from a development is not a planning consideration. Yeah.
Does that assist, Mr. Councillor Hamer?
Yes, it does. And I took it as, I mean, it's very well known of what the input costs are and what the viability costs are, and I thought that was a big part of this decision making. And that answer initially didn't make sense, but that's cleared up. Thanks.
Anything further on this item from anyone? It is a big and important item. Thank you everyone for your patience. And I know that that was a lot of work, so thank you very much to the staff for their patience as well. Moving along, item 13.1, portion of 3 Canning Highway, Victoria Park. I had a question and I apologise for not giving notice for this. In the report, we were only given the details of the people who are being proposed to obtain the lease, but the recommendation includes that another applicant might be approached if the initial suggested applicant does not choose to proceed. Can we, and I'm guessing it would be in a confidential attachment, can we possibly have information about who the other applicants were? And I'm going to ask that of Ms Adams.
Thank you. And yes, Deputy Mayor, if we can send that through, it will be a confidential attachment.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for that. Anyone have any other questions on that item? Nope. Item 14, moving through those, the next questions we have are for 14.3, Transitional Residential and Support Worker Parking Permits Report. Councillor Cruiser, I believe we have a question from you.
Could I just ask, this item notes that the changes made to the R codes in November 2024 have significantly impacted residential parking permit applications, resulting in a 60% approval rate in the affected streets. Could we get a little bit more explanation of that, please?
Mr. Old? Oh, no. Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Through the chair. Just to clarify, sort of on reflection of point 5D, there's some misalignments there with the timeframes and impacts. So the November is referring to when the permit, the policy was endorsed. And then, however, the R code changes occurred in April 2024. So we will amend that point under further considerations for the next report. But and the reasons were, and I'll just sort of explain a bit more contents behind those changes. So the changes were made to the residential design codes, R codes in short, in April 2024, which have reduced the minimum car parking requirements for medium density properties, which asked applicants to plan assessments under the R codes, Part C. Due to the changes, there are now different requirements and assessment methodologies for the town's planning team when assessing residential permits. The planning team must determine whether the property is assessed using R Codes Volume 1, Part B, R Codes Volume 1, Part C, or R Codes Volume 2. The changes make it easier for properties to comply, with the residential R codes, which means that most of the established properties don't meet the residential parking permits. So it actually, that's where one of the changes, it hasn't made it easier, but it does make it more standardised across. So the changes have also made it a bit more cumbersome for the town to complete their assessments, as there are now 3 volumes to check of the R codes against every assessment. So just with some clarity with the timelines and the impacts, we'll update that under further considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Anything further, Councillor Cruiser?
When deciding which of the R codes volumes should be applied, is that based on the current R codes volumes or the time of building or something else?
Mr. Pryor?
From my understanding, it's the current R codes.
Nothing further, Councillor Cruiser. Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Hamer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I did send this email to myself, and I've recently sent it to governance. So hopefully the officers had a quick chance to review it. So with the new difficulties the officers are facing assessing the 3 volumes of R codes, would it be advised to remove that clause from the permits?
Mr. Pryor?
We still feel pretty confident with our approach, but thanks.
Mr. Councillor Hamer.
Had to try, sorry. With the previous year's applications that were shared in a report, I think September, it was shown that we had 27 applications for the 12 months, and this year we've only had 5, 2 of those that were being denied. The report says this has been a greater uptake. What's the rationale for that statement?
Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. I'll take part of that on notice. I just want to double check that that this is the 5 or 6 that are town-wide, or if they're just those 3 streets. So I just need to clarify that. But from the officer's point of view, I think the discretion that we've seen in there with the greater uptick in past presence, only 1 resident has been eligible, and now we're up to 3. So from a percentage basis, it's quite a lot higher.
Calling that 300%. Councillor Hamer?
Yeah, that's good. And At a previous meeting, it was also mentioned that there was a capacity internally by the town to manage permits, and there was a sum mentioned at what would be required if we needed to find a new system or a new approach to do that. Can you remind me what the current town capacity is to deal with all of these permits currently?
Mr. Pryor.
The situation with the parking permits remains the same as previous. We're still using the current system. We are looking to upgrade to a newer system, but because of the R codes being in there, we require urban planning to do that assessment. And that part has become a little bit more cumbersome. Currently, we receive 2 to 3 applications per month, and that seems to be effective as far as managing resources. But again, if we were to change, we would need to consider those additional resources.
Councillor Hamer.
Possibly takes me back to my first question, but I'll move on. If there was a single permit that was applied and issued from the Willis Street Transitional trial area, is that a significantly lower demand than was expected?
Mr. Pryor.
This is just a bit more of a personal reflection, so not from the whole town, but yes, it was a bit of surprise. We received a petition with 200 plus, I think, or around that. We received engagement from slightly less than that. We know occupancy was impacted during that period, so we knew that they wanted to see that. The decision to implement the transitional permit was supported. It was communicated with all those residents adjacent to parking restrictions to utilise. But we've, as say from today's date, we've only had one apply and one was automatically approved. So yes, very surprised that the demand, even though was said that was there, and once we finally got to the very hardcore end of the exercise, only one to actually take it up. There may be maybe those 3 others that have been successful in securing a parking permit, but yeah, again, quite low demands from the whole exercise. Yep.
Councillor Hamer.
Just on that, and it's obviously the officer's opinion. So, would it be probably more the sentiment of those residents and the petition, people who signed the petition, that they thought that was a good idea and not so much their actual need for the permits? Is that possible sort of rationale to explain it, or?
It's pretty tricksy asking Mr. Pryor to get into the minds of the good residents of Willis Street. Do you want to give it a go, Mr. Pryor?
Yeah, I think I can't really answer that for them, why they did or did not take it up. We just as administrators provided that opportunity, and the results are what they are.
Anything further, Councillor Hamer?
Yes, please. Thanks, Deputy Mayor. What is the officer's opinion now of the uptake and impact of parking permits for those residents that are affected by 4P parking, that live near busy areas of Albany Highway, with parking demands that are largely induced not by residents but nearby attractions and businesses?
Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Probably the biggest, for me, the biggest reflection out of this whole exercise is just the effectiveness of time parking restrictions, the paid parking. We saw there was time restricted or 4P. We removed it. The attendances spiked on certain streets, or complaints escalated on other streets, but then since reintroducing the 4P, that has seen a smoothing out of peak periods. There still are some peak periods, but the smoothing out of those has been effective, and at the end of the day, the demand for parking permits seems to be still relatively low in comparison of what we've heard 12, 18 months ago.
Councillor Hamer.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Is there any advice to replace the R codes with a more fitting caveat, similar to the transitional permits? Perhaps the number of permits the administration can manage, or another equitable suggestion?
Mr. Pryor.
Unfortunately, not at this stage.
Councillor Hamer.
That's all, thanks.
That's all. Does anyone else have any questions on this item? I have one. that I'm hoping will be easy. The report tells us that there were, I think, 2 applications for a support worker parking permit that were rejected because they didn't require that. Can you just explain to us, please, the process that those people, what those people were informed? Were they just informed that their application had been rejected, or was it explained to them that they were able to park freely?
I'll need to take part of that on notice, but the process is very much the same. Is that they would have applied, and then given that their property that they were seeking the permit for, and following our investigation, there was no need to require a permit because there was no parking restrictions in that vicinity. So that would have been communicated. In what forms? I just need to check as far as an email or a phone call or whatever.
Thank you. It'd be nice to hear that it was explained to them properly. Anything further on this item? Great. Thank you, everybody. Moving on, 15 committee reports. There are none. There is no motion of which previous notice have been given. Public participation time. Would anyone in the public gallery like to come and ask a question or make a statement? No. There you go, a very full public gallery. Questions from members without notice on general matters. Yes, I can see a few hands and I have a hand up myself. Councillor Melrose, we'll start with you.
I have 2. The first one is about Planet Street and Mercury Street. We just had a couple of emails coming through from community members. There's been yet another accident on that intersection. I raised this intersection as a point in February and requested the town to investigate a couple of options around what could be done at that intersection. And I've gone through my emails and there's a couple of outstanding, I guess, questions that haven't yet been answered that I've already forwarded on to the CEO. But is there an update that we can get from officers right now?
Ms Adams?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll take it on notice and come back to you on that.
Thank you. Councillor Melrose, any other question?
Second one is around Swansea Street Markets. A bit sad to hear that it is now closed. Had quite a bit of gone there and got some delicacies in my time, last couple of decades. Great place, really unique products. Very sad, but just wanting to know what is the future for the site. I've heard storage. How is this all transpiring through the town's DA process, if any at all?
Mr Doyle, do you have anything that can help?
I'm just wondering what I can say. I might take it on notice and have a think about it and then provide some information. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else had their hand up for questions? I'm looking gradually around the room. Councillor, oh goodness. I was looking at you and then I went over there. I'm going to go round the room. Councillor Miles.
Just wondering, I guess thanks for all of the updates with the veg collection, and I'm not meant to thank you, it's a question, but we do appreciate it. I just wondered if we had a new kind of end of veg collection date at this point, or we're still, that we're working towards.
Ms Adams?
Thank you. So at the moment, the town is hoping that between the contractor and town staff, that we will get this finished within the next 2 weeks. We haven't put that out formally because it is still a work in progress. There were 4 crews working on the Saturday on the weekend from the contractor, which managed to clear a little bit, but not as much as we hoped. So we are still working, with the contractor, are still working through areas 3 and 4 to do that. So I hope that update helps.
Content with that, Councillor Miles? Thank you. I'm still continuing to scan around the room. Councillor Devereux, you had a question?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. My question was in relation to the annual meeting of electors last year, and a motion that was put and agreed to subsequently by the town to install a peace pole in the town of Vic Park, and we were reassured that no additional budget was required for that. And I know the person who put the motion was inquiring about what had happened. So maybe an update, and if there's a process to keep the person who put a motion through, given we've had a few annual meeting of electors, if there's a clear process for how people are contacted about their motions. Thanks.
We'll certainly address the first half of that to Mr. Doy.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. We've received that request for information around progress, and at the moment we're just constructing a response back to you, Councillor Devereux, and for all elected members. So we'll take that on notice, knowing that information is on its way. Yeah.
Mr. CEO, do we have any process to inform annual meeting electors movers of the progress of their motions?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for the advice from the Manager of Governance. It is recorded in the minutes of the meeting, but happy to take that one on notice and look at that one as well. Thank you.
Thanks, that'd be great. Anything further, Councillor Devereux?
No, thank you.
Continuing my scan around the room, no one's putting their hand up. Some of them are actively avoiding my eyes. I have a question. With the metro networks starting to be resolved with the train line opening this weekend, and much of the work around the Minton Archer Street area coming to a conclusion, is there some indication of when we might be able to get an understanding of the fairly complex pedestrian arrangements in accessing East Victoria Park Primary School? I'm going to address that to Mr. Doy, please.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ife. Yes, so as we know, or if anyone's been out to the site, the road network is being reopened or is reopened. So we're now in a position to have an understanding of how traffic, people on bikes, people on scooters, all of the above move around through the area. What we don't know yet is what that looks like when the train line is opened, and understanding movement patterns and levels of movement, and what happens when people are trying to get to and from the train, especially through peak times. So I suspect over the coming couple of months we're going to have a very good understanding of what that means, and be in a strong position to engage with the school to understand how especially students, but parents and teachers are accessing school.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Doy, and I'm sure many of elected members have heard similar questions from that school community. Any further questions before we close? Terrific, thank you everyone. We have no confidential matters, and therefore that brings this meeting to an end at 7:57 p.m. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Anderson, for your patience being online. Thank you to our member of the public gallery and to those who joined us on live stream. Good night, everybody.